for the LATCF program. And we hope that when we go through this and have a live demonstration of the portal, it will be useful and helpful to you. I just want to remind you all that the LATCF program has additional money allocated through the American Rescue Fund just for tribal communities. And so that $250 million to allocate to tribes is something that we hope has been useful for your communities. We want to thank you for being part of this so that you can report, and thank you for being good stewards of these federal funds. I know it's the first time reporting for many of you, and so welcome. And thank you for, again, being good stewards of these funds. I'm going to turn over some of the rest of the presentation to my colleagues here at the Office of Capital Access. And so, Jen Parisian, why don't I turn it over to you to walk us through some of the first set of slides here. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. So this presentation is designed to give us an overview of the required reporting for the LATCF program. Today's webinar is for educational purposes, and it should not be construed as legal advice or a statement of policy guidance from Treasury. We are recording today's webinar, and links to the presentation and links that you'll find on the slides will be given to you. So Vera introduced herself. I am Jen Parisian. I'm a policy advisor within the Office of Tribal and Native Affairs at Treasury. I'm from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, and I focus my time mostly on compliance and reporting matters. So good to see many of you in the chat box. I'll cover today an overview of LATCF, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Stephanie Johnson, who's going to actually show us how to do the portal. So next slide, please. So today's webinar is focused on reporting for LATCF, as Ms. Farrow said, for tribal governments. We are, again, recording today's webinar. We will post it on the website. And because we're recording today's webinar, we're going to stop the recording after Stephanie gives us a demonstration, and then we're going to answer live questions. So Q&A will be at the end of the presentation after we stop the recording. Before we get started, we're going to launch a poll to see where you stand with the LATCF and how comfortable you feel. So let's launch a poll, and we'll revisit this at the end. Okay, lots of great answers coming in. First question, looks like the majority are answering at the end of this month, March 31st, with next month following, and moderately comfortable. So by the end of today's webinar, we're hoping the majority of you feel that you feel very comfortable with today's webinar. March 31st is the top answer, so we're hoping to provide you with confidence in that throughout the webinar. And yes, got to submit a report even if you've expended the funds. Okay, thanks everybody. So let's get started. So let's cover what the Local Assistance or Tribal Consistency Fund is, and I'm going to refer to it as its acronym because it's a lot to say, as LATCF. So this funding is intended to be a general revenue enhancement program, much like your general fund. And that's to provide assistance to tribes as well as to those eligible counties and consolidated governments. So tribal governments, you received a set aside in this of $500 million intended to be paid over 2 fiscal years. And under this program, recipients, tribes, you have a broad discretion on the uses of the funds, very similar to your general fund money. And you can use the funding for any governmental purpose except for lobbying activities, as long as you used it within the period of performance or used it as a cost incurred on or after March 15th, 2021. There is no grant end date for this. This funding is for your tribe to use. So let me repeat that. Any governmental purpose, this funding can be used for any governmental purpose as long as it's not lobbying, and the cost incurred start date is March 15th, 2021, so no end date. Many of you asked if this funding can be used for staff salaries, for elder programs, food nutrition, powwows, cultural celebrations, fiestas, tribal parades, social services programs. Some have asked if you can use the funding for drug and substance abuse treatment for citizens, playground equipment, sports booster clubs. The answer to all of that is yes. Yes, you can use it for any governmental purpose. So it's really up to your tribe on what's best to use the funding. So one thing to note is that you can pay off loans and debt service. That is allowable. Just make sure that the debt was issued after March 15th, 2021. So repeating this because this is such a unique pot of funding that you can use it for any governmental purpose and there is no end date. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. While we're on the topic of allowability or the use of funds, construction is also allowable. But please note that this grant must comply with the domestic content procurement preference requirements, or sometimes that's referred to as the Build America, Buy America, or BABA. And under these requirements, expenditures for iron, steel, manufactured products, construction materials, any of those used in infrastructure projects funded by the LATCF award, it has to be produced in the United States. So that might include drywall, it might include floorboards, and this is only required if your tribe did not receive a waiver. If you did not receive a waiver on this, so please be sure you document your compliance on these requirements if your tribe did not receive a waiver. So there is an exception to that, and that's if you are doing this type of construction and if the construction is in response to COVID-19. So for example, you have a justification or documentation that you've written that it's related to some response to COVID, a testing facility, a vaccination clinic, or some other pandemic response. The Build America, Buy America provision does not apply. The Treasury, we were able to obtain a one-year tribal consultation waiver for tribes that entered into their LATCF award agreement between January 17th, 2023 and January 17th, 2024. So if you're a tribe that has a non-COVID-19 related infrastructure project and you spent this money on infrastructure before January 17th, 2023, then this BABA applies to you. So only those that are using it for a non-COVID related infrastructure and you spent your money before January 17th, then you've got to comply with that. But if you're a tribe that has a non-COVID infrastructure project budgeted and you have not expended the funds, the waiver applies to you and you don't have to comply with this domestic content procurement preferences requirement. If you've got specific questions, does it apply to me? Please look at your award agreement, and then you can also email latcf@treasury.gov. So for more information, you can visit the White House's Build America, Buy America Act, the Federal Financial Resources page that contains guidance, FAQs, other resources, and so on. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Again, very unique federal funding. There's no deadline to expend the funds. And a single report, which Stephanie will demonstrate shortly, is due at the end of March of each year until your funds are expended. They've got to keep reporting every year until you expend all the funds. Most tribes, most of you received your funding last year in 2023. So most of you will have your first report due this month on March 31st, 2024. And for those of you that did receive your funding in 2022, your first report was due last year, March 31st, 2023. So again, no deadline to expend the funds, but you do have to report yearly. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, other compliance issues we want to highlight for the group. Please note that interest earned on advances of LATCF, it's not considered program income. And that's provided in the definition of program income under 2 CFR 200.1. So this is unlike other Treasury funding that you might have received from us. Unlike, you know, the Homeowners Assistance Fund or HAF or the Capital Projects Fund or CPF, or either of the SSBCI grant programs, the technical assistance or the other program where you can retain up to $500 in interest earned annually on those programs, and they have to be used for administrative expenses, and then you've got to return any interest over $500. LATCF is not like that. You get to return any interest earned on this funding. Other compliance issues we'd like to highlight before we get into how to do the reporting. NEPA and Federal Davis-Bacon prevailing wages, they don't apply to projects funded solely by LATCF. And I'm noting that that's solely because you can blend and weave this funding with other federal funding, and if NEPA and Federal Davis-Bacon applies to your other pot of funding that you're combining, you've got to comply. So projects funded solely by LATCF, those don't apply. And most provisions actually in the OMB uniform guidance, they don't apply to LATCF. For example, procurement rules and following the procurement thresholds, that does not apply to LATCF. Subrecipient monitoring does not apply to LATCF. Program income, equipment and property disposal. But please read the LATCF guidance to better understand exactly what does apply. For example, the single audit and its implementing regulations does apply. So this is still audited even though it's a unique pot of funding. Okay, and again, if you're combining or braiding any of the LATCF funding with other federal grants, you've got to comply with the stricter of the guidance. So again, if this other pot of funding, you've got to follow the uniform guidance on procurement, and you're combining LATCF with this other pot, or environmental policies like NEPA, you've got to comply. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Reporting, our purpose of today's webinar. So the report collects obligation and expenditure data for categories of government services. So for example, healthcare, education, public safety, social services, economic development, and it also requires obligations and expenditure data for any capital expenditures that you might be doing for things like roads, transportation, water and sewer, technology. Stephanie's going to demonstrate what that looks like next. I mentioned earlier, but worth repeating, that this funding, again, is very open. You can do any governmental service except for lobbying. So each recipient must submit a certification in the report under the form that will be in Appendix 1. So with every annual report, you've got to certify that no LATCF funds were used for lobbying activities. In addition to completing the annual certifications and representations in SAM.gov, so this is a new field that has been added to the report starting in 2024. So those of you that reported last year, this will be a new field for you to fill out. Also new in this report, and this was a question asked in our pre-questions that we sent out in the Zoom registration. Yes, if you've expended your funding, you can close out early. So starting this year in 2024, recipients that report all of their expenditures equal to their LATCF award, you can close out. So we'll provide more information about the closeout process later in 2024. Okay, so some of you might be asking, why are we collecting all this information and why do we require reports? And that's really because we want this funding to be focused on recovery. So that you have intentional execution, you're addressing priority areas for a strong economic tribal recovery, and that you're helping those tribal citizens or tribal members that need help the most. So you're focused on recovery. And of course, that you're being accountable for these federal funds. The Treasury American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA programs, including the LATCF and the SLFRF that many of you I know are working on, requires programmatic and performance reporting to build out public awareness, increase accountability, and monitor compliance of eligible uses. So be sure you're being accountable for the funds. And you're being transparent about that. So sharing with Treasury projects and expenditures your tribe, your pueblo, your village are implementing during this time. And finally, we want to make sure that how you're reporting information is user-friendly. The LATCF reporting, which will be demoed shortly, has improvements requested by recipients of other funding. So we held a consultation on the LATCF, and it was requested by tribal leadership that this funding not only provide maximum flexibility on the uses of the funds, but also that the reporting is simple, that it balances compliance with tribal resources. So you'll see in the report that it's very user-friendly and it has been responsive to this feedback. Okay, and we just talked about why we're collecting the data, the principles of reporting, that's focused on recovery, accountability, transparency. But there's also another reason to file your reports on time and with accuracy, and that is that it's included as a testing item in your single audit, your audit. So many of you know, but worth recapping, a single audit is required when your tribe expends more than $750,000 in grants in a year. And for those of you that may not know, the compliance supplement, that is something we release yearly, and it's an important tool that tells auditors what to test for in grant programs and gives them an overview of the grant program. So this chart here, this matrix, it's taken out of the 2023 compliance supplement for LATCF. And you can see in this chart, the Y's are yeses, are things going to be tested, and the N's are no. So we could see in the reporting column, which is highlighted in the red box, that is going to be a testing item in your audit for this funding. Did you file your reports? And does your reports contain accurate information? So this is one of the easiest potential audit findings to avoid. After you certify and submit the reports, be sure you download a copy, a PDF copy for your records to prepare for your audit. So now that we've covered an overview of the compliance of this funding, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's actually going to show us how to do the report and demonstrate the portal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Johnson, and I am the data and reporting analyst for LATCF. So what I'm going to start off with doing is sharing my screen and going through some of the activities that are required for reporting. But before we get started in entering the compliance reports, I did want to provide a refresher on how you are able to update the POCs associated with your account. So once you are logged into the portal, you'll see these 3 lines in the upper left-hand corner. Once you click on them, you can select the account option. And as this generates, you will see, 1 second, let me log back into the system. That is one thing that does happen with our portal, is sometimes we do get kicked out. So bear with me for a moment as I get logged back in. And once I do get logged in, you will be able to see that this is the area that you will then access your account from. But I will give you a start of the live access to that as it pulls back up. So in accessing the portal, you go in through this link, and then you'll be directed again to this home page. From there, you can select the account page, which then does generate where your account would be. However, since I am in a test account, it does not generate. So I'm going to transfer back to these screenshots. Your account will show as your account name in this blue hyperlinked area. So you are able to click on that link and you will be taken to these 3 tabs. And as an account administrator, you are going to want to select the certification tab. The account administrator would then input their information into this line, requesting that you are certifying the information you're providing on the designation form is accurate. So as an account administrator, that is the only person with that role can enter this information. You'd put your name there and select the submit button. Once you submit, you can go to the designation form area. In the designation form area, you are able to update existing contacts as well as enter new contacts and provide the roles for these contacts. This is very important to make sure that all of the contact information is accurate. And this is where you would go to update any email addresses or phone numbers, as we do know that there are changes in that information as well as changes in staff members. And so if you do have new staff members, you will enter their information in this area, and you will be prompted with a selection of 3 accounting roles or 3 administrator type roles. And to select, you would either choose account administrator, authorized representative for reporting, and point of contact for reporting. You are able to have a person is able to have multiple roles, and a role can have multiple users assigned to it. Therefore, you can have more than one person with the same role to allow for backup in your reporting. So after all of that information is updated, you would hit complete and your information would be stored in this bottom section. And this is what you can refer back to as you need to make updates going forward. Now I want to go back to the home screen, and I'm going to transition to accessing the LATCF report. As you log in, you will want to select the compliance report option on the left. From there, if you have multiple other reports, you will also see them in this section. You will go down to the LATCF compliance reports. Here you will be able to see current reports that are due, as well as reports that have been submitted in the past. Keep in mind, there is a helpful legend here on the right that will tell you what these icons mean. Anything that is the blue pencil, that is an indicator that this report does need to be edited and information is needed. If you do see the blue eye, this is a report that has already been submitted, but you still do have access to go and view that report only. No changes can be made. Also, you will see this download option. This option does allow for you to download the report to save for your records. Additional information is the name of the report. As the naming conventions change each year, we do provide consistency in those naming conventions with just changing the year of the report. Tells you what type of report. For LATCF, these are all annual reports. And it does also tell you the status of your report in this section to also help you easily identify what report to go into. So for this demo, we are going to go into this LATCF report. Okay, once you have entered the portal, you'll see some information. You'll have some basic instructions on this first instructions tab. And it is a good resource for you to go over and refresh yourself what is required for reporting. You will also notice there are blue hyperlinks throughout the portal, and these are links that will direct you to the user guide as well as some self-help resources that can help you along with any questions that may arise during your report. Also, you will note that you can reach the IT department if you're having access trouble or any technical difficulties by selecting this hyperlink here. One thing that does remain consistent on your report is your information regarding the report. This will let you know your current status of the report, the name of the report in which you are in, the reporting type. Again, this is an annual report. And most importantly, you will see your deadline. This is when your report is due by. And for LATCF, the deadline is March 31st, 2024. However, we do realize that that is a weekend date, so we do ask that you plan accordingly to try and make sure you are submitted prior to that date. However, the portal will remain open until the next business day to allow for some late submissions. You will also see your allocated amount in this section. This is the amount of funding that you were provided and what you will be reporting on. The reporting period will be for obligations and expenditures that have taken place up through December 31st, 2023. At this time, you do not need to report out for 2024 funding that was received. The 2023 annual report is only for funding that was received through December 31st, 2023. The next tab that you will go to will be the recipient information tab. This tab doesn't require any input at every time of the reporting. It is just pre-populated information that has already been provided. Then you will go to the reporting category. And notice as we change screens, you can use the back buttons at the bottom or the next button at the bottom, or toggle between the tabs here. You will also note that a save pop-up will happen as you change pages. So that way, if you are going back and forth between different tabs, your information is being saved, even if you don't hit the save button at the bottom. Now, this is the tab that you are going to enter the majority of your information in. Now, the funding for LATCF is used for costs that were incurred after March 15, 2021 for all approved activities other than lobbying activities. Recipients should select the appropriate governmental purpose reporting category based on the nature of the obligation and expenditures and identify whether the obligation expenditure was for an infrastructure project. That can be done on this side. Obligation expenditures reported should be scoped and aligned within a single government purpose category. And these are our categories over here on the left. And you will see that there are 4 category options with subcategories listed below them. The information you are entering on this tab cannot exceed your allocated amount. This is the total amount of funding that you have received. Therefore, your obligation totals and expenditure totals cannot exceed this allocated amount. Also, your expenditure totals cannot exceed your obligations. You must first report obligations before the expenditure amount to make sure that the expenditure is equal or lesser. And then another thing you will notice is that there is a cumulative obligation and expenditure column, as well as a current period obligation and expenditure column. The cumulative obligations and expenses are for the total LATCF funding. This is how much funding you have used and spent in this specific category over the entirety of the program. And then the current period obligations expenditures is only the costs that you have incurred during this reporting period. So this reporting period would be from January 1st, 2023 through December 1st, 2023, December 31st, 2023. And this is all in that area would be where you would put the amount of obligation expenditures that have taken place in your current period obligations. If you have received funding also in 2022, those amounts would be included in your cumulative obligations and expenditures. Also note that your cumulative obligations and expenditures will always be greater than or equal to your current period obligations and expenditures. The current period obligations and expenditure should never exceed your cumulative obligations and expenditures. And I know there's a lot of information, so I am going to put in a sample just to show you the process in entering the data. So we are going to say that we have spent our entire allocation, 300,000, and we have spent that 300,000 for the entirety of the project. We are going to say, though, in this last year, between January 1st, 2023 and December 31st, 2023, of that 300,000, 200,000 of that was obligated in that time. And therefore, we still only spent the total 300,000 in that reporting period. And then you can also do a check by scrolling down to the bottom and verifying that the amounts listed are in green. You can also see that there is a check mark still at the top of this section. That is letting you know that the information was entered accurately. However, sometimes that information isn't entered accurately. You can see what an error looks like if we have exceeded an amount. And we go down and we can see, it will tell us your current period expenditures cannot be greater than the cumulative expenditures. So it does let us know that we need to fix this number. So we would either reduce this to 100,000 or less, or we would have to increase our cumulative expenditures back to the 300,000. And by doing that, we have resolved the error that has occurred. Also, another item that your reports may not come pre-populated with zeros. We do realize that this is a tedious ask to for you to enter a zero in every category option that is not being used. However, it is a way that we can make sure that the report was completed rather than an item being skipped. So we ask that you just take the time to enter zeros in any blank field, or else you will receive a warning. So once we have entered all of our project information, again, it does not need to be in one single category, it can be spread out among multiple categories. You are then able to save and move on to the certification and submit tab. And the first thing that does pop up in this tab is what Jen was previously discussing regarding the question asking if you are ready to close out. This pop-up will only happen if you are showing that your full allocated amount has been obligated and expended. If your allocation amount has not been fully obligated or expended, you will not receive this option. This is just an inquiry. This is asking if you are ready to close out. And it says, please be aware that this is not your final report. Included in forthcoming guidance will be information on how to close out your LATCF award, including completion of a final report information. This is just letting us know if you are ready for closeout. It's a yes or no question. Either answer does not eliminate you from closeout. It just is an inquiry to see if you are ready. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I am going to select no. I do want to stress though, even if you do select yes, you are still required to continue with annual reporting until further guidance has been provided. Okay, so now that we have addressed that, we're going to take an overview look at what have we reported in this reporting period. This is giving you a total similar to what was on your reporting category summary at the bottom. It tells you your cumulative obligations and expenditures, as well as what your current period obligations and expenditures. And then we do have another question for you. And it says, check here if you believe your jurisdiction has expended all of its LATCF funding. This is just another check to see if you are ready for that closeout because you have fully expended your allocation amount. And so we are going to check yes, that we are. Another question that is asked, and this is a required question, is has the recipient spent any of its LATCF funds on lobbying activities as outlined in the ineligible use section of the Treasury's guidance for the Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund? Again, as we stated before, that lobbying funds used for lobbying is not an allowable expense at this time. So it is a yes or no question. We have selected no. Another new question that Jen just spoke about is the Federal Audit Clearinghouse question. And this is asking if have you expended $750 or more in federal award funds during your most recent completed fiscal year. Also, if you hover over the information, it will pop up. It says if an entity expends $750,000 or more in federal awards during the fiscal year is required to conduct an audit for that year per the CFR. And so this is just a check to see if you are aware if you have expended more than $750,000 in any federal award. It is not limited to only the LATCF funds you have received here. It is for any federal award. And it is a yes or no question. So we are going to say no, and that would be the end of questions. However, if you do say yes, you will be prompted with another question. Have you submitted a single audit or program-specific audit report to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse? So this is saying, yes, we did expend more than $750,000. And now they're asking, did you submit a single audit? And then also additional information here can be found on the Federal Audit Clearinghouse website, www.fac.gov, is where an entity may submit a single audit and program-specific audit report of its federal award expenditures. And so there you would say, yes, we've submitted one, Or if you have not, you would say, no, we have not submitted an award, and you would need to provide that justification of if you have expended $750,000 on an award, why have you not submitted an audit? And you would just provide that response in this area. And I will just enter test for the purpose of this demonstration. And then lastly, you will be reviewing your statement as seen in other reports. And you are also certifying in this bottom section that you are the person that is currently logged in and providing this report. This information will be reflected on the report that you were the person who had certified and submitted the report. Once you certify and submit, your status here will change to submitted. And that information then will be reflected as well on that initial compliance screen where you select your report. And just a reminder, the due date for the current 2023 annual report is March 31st, 2024, and it is for reporting through December 31st, 2023. And even if you have expended all of your funds, you are still required to complete an annual report. And that is the full demonstration I have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then transition back to Jen. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, for the demonstration. One of the questions that we've been getting is the definition of an obligation throughout this. And an obligation, according to the uniform guidance, is defined as an award, an order placed for property and services, contracts, or a sub-award made. So something where you're obligated to pay someone. So let's go on to the next slide. And let's launch our final poll to analyze what we've learned today. Okay, answers are coming in. Okay, well, this is really positive. Previously, we had a pretty high percentage of attendees that had little knowledge or not at all, followed by moderately. So very and highly feels like we've done a great job here. Question 2, when is the annual LATCF report due? Nearly all of you have answered the right answer, which is this month, March 31st. And finally, the final question, do I need to submit a report even if I have expended all of the funds? The answer is yes, and that's correct. So great there. We are now going to stop the recording to begin our question and answer session.